fourth seminar that we've done, and the history of it. Well, first of all, let me introduce Barbara. I'm Chet Gentry, and Dr. Gentry, both of you know me. Barbara McGinnis is a former nurse practitioner, still a nurse practitioner, and also now a lawyer, and she works for Tim Takis. It's an elder law attorney, and that law firm has been a pioneer not only in Tennessee but in this country with elder law practice dealing with end-of-life planning, estate issues, making, and she'll tell you a little bit more about it. But my mom is a nurse and used to work with this company, and she's been retired, but even without my mom's involvement, I would see Tim Takis' name in many different places at senior fairs and in writings and journal articles and things like that. And so when we started planning this seminar, I felt like it would be good to have both the medical and the legal side because they're such intertwined areas. So Barb and I are going to take turns speaking, and we appreciate you coming. The topic of end-of-life planning, is there anything you want to say before we start?
No, I was going to ask if you have your remote or if I need to sit there and click.
Probably, that's something we didn't think about. And
didn't work that
I'm
out.
sure there's a gadget, and we can tag team the seats and try to stay out of the camera.
It's all right.
Fire.
No.
The topic of end-of-life planning is important. I'm going to let Barb.
Well, why do you need to plan? I mean, other than Dr. Gentry invited you here today, why is it important that we start planning for our end of life? And it's because we're all going to have one. You know, we are all going to have an end of life experience. And how much we want to control that ourselves, because most people don't die in their sleep in their own bed. You know, that's the way a lot of people say, that's the way I want to go. Well, sometimes we have control over those things and sometimes we don't. But it is still important to exercise autonomy and control. It's some of the principles that we value the most in this country and in our society. It's definitely highly prized. You want to stay in control as long as possible and independent, right? So the other part of why you need to have a plan is because it allows for prudent planning, because end-of-life care can be quite costly. So planning ahead will allow us to preserve or protect not only our own autonomy and control over our end of life, but also perhaps allow us to protect and preserve assets as well. So my little alarm clock there tells you, wake up, it is time to start planning.
I'm going to ask John, I know John is what is palliative care and what is hospice care, what is end-of-life care? It's all in a continuum, and there's a lot of preconceptions about what hospice care is, both good and bad. There's a wide variety of pictures that come to mind. But if we start with the diagnosis of any kind of illness that is considered life-threatening or debilitating, a stroke, a heart attack, a lot of people start noticing some changes in their cognitive ability, and that makes, there's a question that's always lingering, am I developing dementia? But at the time of diagnosis, most of us are in a place where we want everything restored. We call that restorative care. We want things put back to normal. If it's broken, we want it fixed. And so disease-modifying treatment or disease-curative treatment is our first choice. And as it turns out that you don't have a disease that's curable, that's going to march forward, or sometimes it's not one disease, it's several, and it marches forward, you initially try to restore it, but then less and less about restoring it and more about learning to live with the symptoms. And so the disease-modifying treatment as you go forward becomes less and less, and palliative care or symptom management, palliation of the symptoms, becomes more and more. Hospice care is more at the end, and anymore, there were organizations called hospices that would help reduce the suffering associated with diseases. And then in this country, in the 1980s, I believe, hospice became a Medicare benefit. And the government had to decide, well, we're not going to pay for restorative care and palliative care at the same time, which is a highly debatable concept that causes some problems. But now hospice has become a Medicare benefit with government defined parameters of when hospice care is appropriate. And typically a physician has to certify that he believes that there's a 6-month life expectancy or less. Of course, we can't predict the future, so it's within a reasonable degree of certainty. And depending on the disease, that may or may not be the case. The hospice benefit can be extended beyond 6 months if the physician still believes there's a 6-month life expectancy. So, and then once death occurs, then there's bereavement support for the family and friends. So go ahead to the next slide. The type of decline varies depending on the disease. There are some types of decline that, you know, there's the diagnosis and death may come quickly. Now, all cancer doesn't have this trajectory. Depending on the type of cancer, the stage it's at when it is discovered, the degree of treatment. Sometimes a severe decline is caused by the disease. Sometimes a severe decline is caused by the treatment, with the hopes of a recovery from the treatment and hopefully more benefit from that. But this is sort of just to illustrate the different modes of terminal illness. Often it's a few years, but can happen over a few months. Next slide. Another type of decline is slow decline with intermittent periods of illness, exacerbations of heart attack, one heart attack after another, or congestive heart failure, where you have an exacerbation, the lungs fill up with fluid, you go to the hospital, they get you tuned up, you come back, medicine's adjusted hopefully for a long time. But as the disease marches on, typically the severity of illness gets worse, the closeness to the brink of death before we bring you back gets worse, and the intervals get shorter. And that happens until somebody dies, or often with good decision making, there's usually a point at which a person will say, you know, the benefit of going to the hospital just isn't worth the trouble. I'd rather stay home or stay where I am and do the best you can, keep me comfortable. But if that's not enough, then, you know, make sure that I don't suffer too much. And if people offer that decision, that's a good thing. If the decision is not offered, then somebody gets scared, calls 911, and off we go back to the emergency room. So that's another mode. Next process. And then finally there's a prolonged dwindling or a slow decline. And this is more with dementia, Alzheimer's, Pick's disease, multi-infarct dementia. But often it's not quite this, but a conglomeration of many diseases. Subsequent recurrent small strokes, renal failure, some congestive heart failure, or COPD, and it may be several things. But it's slow and it's a gradual process. And in this process, more than the others, one of the most significant things that happens, especially if it's affecting the brain, is you lose the ability to make decisions. And so how the care goes and at what point we make the switch or the transition from trying to restore things to relieving suffering to stopping the goal of helping people live as long as possible, and just controlling symptoms, is somebody's got to make that decision. And if you haven't made clear indications to your decision makers or chosen decision makers, then often nobody ever makes that decision, and people go for years and years continuing a dwindle, transition from home, several cycles in the hospital to home health, and then finally from the hospital to the skilled nursing facility and intermediate facility, and people can go decades, often 3 to 5 years, without being aware of their circumstances, unless somebody offered a decision-making process. Next slide. So during that process, there are many things that happen. Some of it we can predict and others we can't. There's loss of function. A stroke can cause the inability to perceive. There may be multiple losses of function: hearing, speech, ambulation. It may be subtle, generalized things such as generalized arthritis and weakness and frailty, or it may be something sudden in a stroke where there's paralysis of the arm and leg and loss of speech, or the decreased ability to breathe, decreased ability to ambulate, to walk, to drive. There's pain, pain from cancer, from bone pain, nerve pain, tumor progression, bone metastases, chest pain, and we want relief from that, and often the pain is multifactorial and difficult to control. Sometimes there's gradual bleeding with loss of blood and recurrent transfusions until somebody decides, okay, I don't want another transfusion, just keep me comfortable. But making those decisions, you've got to have a relationship with somebody that can give you the information, that can tell you what life is going to be like if you don't get treatment or transfusions or hospitalization, and what life will be like if you do get the treatment, and what are the consequences of the treatment. And people often have to sit on that decision for a while, or maybe they'll make the decision and then family members come in and they want, don't give up, Dad, rally again, and then sometimes the decisions that the patients make are driven by the family's fear of letting go. And it becomes very complicated, and that's why everybody needs to be involved. And the more conversation that can happen, the more at ease everybody is, that there's a common plan that everybody is prepared for. And that's all about a subject that is difficult to talk about. Bowel obstruction can be very painful with nothing, to do about it other than keep the pain at bay. Sometimes there can be perforation, vomiting, or, people may have this picture of dying peacefully at home, but there's a lot of loss of body fluids and bleeding. In most cases, however, that doesn't happen. Airway obstruction. A lot of people have fear about suffocating, or shortness of breath, fluid accumulation, and liver failure and renal failure. So the point of this slide is that there are many symptoms to control. In medicine, we've gotten very good at controlling almost all symptoms, but the symptoms are more than physical. There's fear, there's loss of relationships, and then there's the complex process of what happens to family relationships during that time. Next slide. So during this time, there's what we're able to do for ourselves. Most of us are independent and we take care of our needs, and sometimes we have some support, but as we lose function, we need physical support or financial support. Much of the medical care that we need is way beyond our means unless we have insurance to cover it. There's family, friends, church. There can be sitters or home health aides, home health nursing services, assisted living, skilled nursing facility, intermediate nursing facility, or hospital. Each of these have costs associated with them, and Barbara will talk a little bit about that shortly. Next slide.
Actually, we'll talk about it now. So if you'll go to the slide with the little dollar sign there, cost of care. As you move through the continuum of where you're going to receive that care, dictated because of your symptoms or functional decline, you're going to see an associated cost to those settings. Independent living might be someone that is very early in a disease process that's just no longer safe to continue to live at home. And while that's more expensive than living in your own home, especially if your home's already paid for, it's still relatively manageable. So $32,000 per year on average for an apartment that you have housekeeping services, you might have maintenance services associated already, and then a congregate dining area and maybe some activities and even some arranged transportation. So if you think about all those services that come together there, that if you would have to pay individually and privately for if you were living at your home in the community, that's not a bad deal. As you move up in the level of assistance that you're needing, assisted living is really the level of care for people that start needing help with activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, maybe even some help transferring from one surface to another, from a bed to a chair, etc. Maybe some help with actually mobilization. So those kind of physical, low medical complexity, maybe high physical assistance or supervision. Cost of care slightly more than independent living. Now, the other thing that we've noticed in our experience is very urban areas like Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, the cost of those services tend to be slightly higher than in a more rural community. These are Tennessee state averages, though. You'll also see that assisted living costs are probably increasing faster than any other level of service costs because it's a very high demand. Actually, with a growing number of people over the age of 65, largest segment of the population growing, we all know that, but actually not seeing an increase in the number of people living in nursing homes. Why? Because they're getting their home and community-based services and those needs taken care of in an assisted living level of care. So great variety in those costs. So it's very amenity driven, and because there's a lot of high demand for that, you'll see an increase in those rates. Nursing home level of care, that's the big fear factor. Everybody fearful of living in a nursing home and the costs associated with that. True, on average, it's about $83,000 a year, even in our state. And how does that get paid for? I mean, most people don't have that kind of income when you're at an advanced age that you're paying for that, nor do they have the depth of resources that it's very easily paid for. So see what I mean about planning ahead, about where am I going to receive my care, and how am I going to preserve my assets that I can pay for that. You know, if we could do rewind and we all buy long-term care insurance, that'd be one thing. But for a lot of times, for people that need that level of care, it's too late to get long-term care insurance. So you're looking at personal resources, or generally Medicaid is the greatest payer for long-term care in a nursing home. Now you say, what about Medicare? What does Medicare pay for? Yeah, Medicare pays for a very small percentage of care in nursing homes. Skilled nursing facility care, rehab care. It's a maximum of a 100-day benefit period, provided that they are getting skilled care during that period of time. And then that 100 days is renewable. So there may be more than one 100-day benefit period a year, but there has to be a break and spell of illness. Those are Medicare criteria. If you have an HMO, a health maintenance organization, or some sort of managed care organization, their criteria may be a little bit more strict than even Medicare. So Medicare and Medicare replacement insurance policies, not a big payer for long-term care. So I'm just gonna stay at home. I don't have that kind of money, and I'm not leaving my house anyway. I wanna stay at home, and I wanna just let my daughter take care of me. How about that for a plan? Well, there's costs associated with family being your caregiver as well. It may not cost you out of pocket quite as much, but it may cost that family member that's giving up their employment in the community. It may cost them their income, their retirement income. It reduces their Social Security draw at some point in time because they've taken a hiatus from work. But it also has a greater cost than that, a relationship cost. So if you remember that all care has a cost, it's either dollars or it's blood, sweat, and tears, that we need to plan ahead for what kind of care am I anticipating and where do I want to have that care and how are we going to get it paid for? Back to you, Dr. Gentry.
Feel free to jump in, anything you want to have there. So it's important to think about these, and it's difficult to talk about death or dying or even how you're going to be cared for. That's an awkward conversation for family members to bring up among themselves. And most people, though, feel that it's important. By the time we reach adulthood, most people have been in contact with some family members that have had to take care of somebody that was aging, and they've developed some ideas of how they want things to be in the end, or at least about those experiences that they've had or seen, and they have strong opinions about it. And if you ask them, 60% of people say that making sure their family is not burdened by tough decisions is important. They don't want to burden their families, but if you ask how many have talked to their families about how they want things to be, only 56% have talked. And then if you, I think there's another slide that even less actually have a written plan where they've made a formal plan. Most people agree that it's important to state clearly what you want to your, what you want. And 70% of people say they prefer to die at home, but in reality, 70% of us die in a hospital, nursing home, long-term care facility. Next slide. So with respect to preparation, 80% of people say that if seriously ill, they would want to talk to their doctor, but only 7% report having an end-of-life conversation with their doctor. Because if you're in the hospital when everybody's thinking about it, you know, should we resuscitate this person? Everybody feels like, well, that's the primary care doctor's job. When people are in for their primary care appointment or their annual physical, it's not typically done. And that's changing for a lot of reasons. But 82% of people say it's important to put their wishes in writing. That statistic seems high to me. 23% actually have done it. And so if we want to be prepared, we need to think about it proactively. As a family physician and somebody who's always been interested in hospice and in geriatric care, I'm probably more proactive than most, but even in the majority of my career, I wasn't consistent about it. I didn't have a thorough approach that helped people think about it. And I've started doing that now. I think that it ought to be the primary care doc as far as the medical contact, because I have the relationship, the long-term relationship with people. But then the next question is when? When should I have that conversation? The only time that I consistently see the most people is at the annual physical. So I've been shoehorning this conversation into an already packed agenda, and it's a conversation that can't be made, isn't appropriate to be made in a one-time shot. So that's why we're having this seminar, why I produce videos, and also have found tools to do that. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, the next slide actually is going to get to my question. You can go ahead.
Okay.
So, it's not a knowledge deficit. You know, the people that have come tonight, how many people, like, this is the very first time you thought about planning and having that conversation? Probably not. You've probably heard about advanced directives, living wills, powers of attorney. You know they exist out there. Probably even thought, I should get that done one day. May have them, may have those documents. But, you know, the other statistic that goes along with the ones that Dr. Gentry just showed, if 80+% of Americans know about advanced directives, that tells you it's not a knowledge deficit. Public policy, they've done their job, they've gotten the word out there, we know it exists. 23% of the people have actually gotten around to putting it in writing, what they would want, creating an advanced directive of some sort. You know what? It's worse than that. 39% of people that have them can find them when they need them. So what do you think? How good is that, right? It's like, I got money in the bank, but I can't find my checkbook. You know, what good is that doing you? So that's why the conversations are so terribly important. Because Dr. Gentry, experienced in working in long-term care, hospital settings, hospice, end-of-life care, if somebody is in a bed, he's in charge of their care, but they don't have an advanced directive, are you standing there wondering, what am I going to do for this person? You know, we can't do anything. Sorry, we can't make a decision. No, a decision's going to be made. A plan is going to be put in place. There is going to be a person there that's going to speak up for that person if they can't speak for themselves. It just may not be what that person wanted because nobody knows. You didn't have that conversation. So prudent planning ahead. Why don't you have it in place? Why haven't you put it in writing? Why don't you have it in a place where people can get it when you need it? Why haven't you talked about it? It's not the most pleasant conversation. And, you know, I try having that conversation with my mom, and I get maybe like that far, a couple answers, and then she's like, let's talk about something else. You know, so it's not a conversation that you have once. You kind of have to keep working at it so that you get, you find out, what does my spouse want? What do my parents want? Do they know what I want if it were me? There's a few really famous lawsuits, highly publicized, and you guys have probably heard about them. You remember Terry Schiavo down in Florida a few years ago? You know how old she was? How old was she?
40?
I think she was even younger than that. She may have been 40 by the time she passed away, but I think she was in her 20s when she actually had her event. There was a case even before that, Nancy Cruzan. It's an older case. Now, most of us in here are old enough that we actually remember it, but she was also in her 20s. And these people had major medical events that caused them to be in a persistent vegetative state, and they weren't some little 80-year-old lady that had stroke, and the family was wondering whether or not to put in a tube feeding. These were young, vibrant women that had something sudden and tragic happen to them. So the point of that is, you never know when you're going to need them. It's not like I'm going to wait until I get old and do it. I'm not going to wait until I get that diagnosis of cancer or congestive heart failure, because that might not be the ticket out. You know, I mean, it may be a car wreck. It may be some other sort of event. So anyway, everybody thinks it's too early to start planning until it's too late. And you go, oh, it's not any fun to talk about. I got other things to worry about. But nonetheless, so why don't we do it? Is it the cost? You think, is it too expensive to do? Is that why you think people don't do it? Nah, I don't think so either. They might be afraid of paying a law firm to come in, an unknown of how much that's going to possibly cost to do that. I can tell you it's not that expensive. But if it were cost prohibitive, there's still even the opportunity of there are state-approved documents that are just free. You know, you download them from the internet. Before you leave tonight, Dr. Gentry is going to give you a document that you can use. So cost isn't going to be a barrier, or if it is a barrier, we can work around that. Are you too busy to do it? There's probably a lot of busy people in Cookville tonight. But you might not, but busy. It doesn't really take long, and especially if you say, I'm going to spend 5 minutes a week working on this until I get it down. And you know what? You've got for as long as you have mental capacity to continue to work on it. So if you start now, you've probably got a really long time to perfect it and change it and amend it and tweak it and tell people about it. So I'm going to do it when I need it. Well, when do you buy homeowners insurance? Everybody in here got a home? Okay. Do you have homeowners insurance? Yeah. You don't run out and buy homeowners insurance when your house is smoking. You know, when it catches on fire. That's not when you run out and buy your homeowners insurance. It's not when you buy your car insurance. It's not after you hit that telephone pole. So putting some sort of plan in place about how you're going to be taken care of doesn't happen when you're in the emergency room. That's not the time to start thinking about it. We spend a lot of time in a law office looking at all of these documents. Advanced directives is an umbrella term that can include a healthcare power of attorney, a living will, or in the state of Tennessee, we've kind of given up the term living will in lieu of advanced care plan. A post form and a DNR, those are physician orders that should be derived from your previously prepared advanced directives. You can't run out and do a post form all by yourself. A durable general power of attorney has to do with the business part of your life. Okay, it's how your taxes and bills and real estate are going to continue to be handled after you're not able to do that any longer for yourself. And a will or a will substitute. Now that's really the big thing that brings people in the doors. They go, I want a will. Or they'll call up and say, I want a trust. Oh really? What kind of trust do you think you want? You know, I'll fix that up for you. People spend a lot of time worrying about what's going to happen to their stuff after they die. Where's my money going to go? Where's my house going to go? Who's going to get my stuff? Who's going to get my money? Well, that's important, and I really appreciate people that worry about that. You know, as a lawyer, I really appreciate people that worry about that, and it's important. But worrying about what's going to happen to you before you die, I think, is even more important. So, next slide, I think we're going back to Dr. Gentry. We're going to talk about 5 wishes in particular.
Tools. In the state of Tennessee, we have a post form, and I found that inadequate. That's more orders for the current situation. Somebody will say, if I have a heart attack right now or my heart stops, I don't want CPR or I don't want to be put on a ventilator. Well, most people are not in that situation, and when you are in that situation, it's a poor time to make that kind of a decision. So I'm going to make the distinction between advanced directives. An advanced directive is a directive you make in advance that's conditional. If I get to this state, then this is what I want done. But for right now, most people want restorative care. It's only when we get along that disease continuum that it's no longer beneficial to go to the hospital, or no longer beneficial to get CPR, or no longer beneficial to be put on a breathing machine, that you would say, okay, make me a DNR, a do not resuscitate. And that's, you hear a lot of talk about that because healthcare workers, when somebody's coming in and there's a lot wrong with them and their odds of survival is small, we hate resuscitating somebody in which there's very little hope of restoring them anywhere near the state that they were in just a few hours ago. Because it's more likely going to be an undesirable scenario. And so, or if we have somebody that's very, very sick, we're asking all the time, you know, has anybody mentioned end-of-life planning to them? You know, are we going to have to resuscitate this person that clearly is not going to benefit from it? And it puts the healthcare workers in a difficult spot. And if we ask the question, we risk being appearing uncaring and unsympathetic. But that's the resuscitation orders or orders for right now. The advanced directives are more in the future. So I was looking for a tool that would address as many scenarios as possible, and this is one that I found. It's on the website called Aging with Dignity, and the document is called 5 Wishes. You can advance the slide. And there's a sample form of this document on there. Advance to the next slide. It has a place for you to indicate who your decision makers are going to be. And usually you should have a first choice and a second choice in case that one is unavailable or ill or not able to make decisions. The next section that it has, if you advance the slide, is a place where you may put limitations on life support. And I'm going to, usually I ask in the encounter at the wellness exam, I'll ask people, where would you prefer to spend your last days? And in my experience, most people want to be at home, with 2 exceptions. It doesn't matter if they're not aware of their circumstances. If they're in a status of mental capacity where they're not aware of their circumstances, it really doesn't matter to them whether they're home or not. They're more concerned with burdening their family. And so if I'm unaware of my circumstances, then defer to the family. The other thing they don't want is to be a burden to their family. But if you say to your son, I don't want to be a burden, your son is going to say, you know, they make this promise, and the promise is, I'll never let you go to a nursing home. And they will kill themselves living up to that promise, all the while saying, if this ever happens to me, I'm not going to put my family through this. But nobody ever, rarely, if we don't have this decision-making process, we're not prepared for it. So a way that I've found that is easier to, or more effective, is rather than say, I don't want to be a burden, say to your family member, if I am dying, I prefer to be at home, but the most important thing to me for my quality of life is relationships. And if you are burned out trying to be my nurse, my case manager, my nurse aide, then there's not going to be much left for you to be my son or my wife or my husband. There's only a few people in the world that can be in that role. And so I would, I suggest that you say is, I would rather be in a facility where there are professionals taking care of my medical needs so that you are free to be my wife or my husband or my son. And that way, it's a gift to your family so that 6 months after your death, they'll know that they were carrying out your wishes, and that they made themselves available for a relationship, and they don't feel guilty like they've failed for letting their dad or their mom go to the nursing home. The other point that is important, especially if you remember the slide of the dwindling end of life, and if you lose your decision-making capacity there, you could go years unable to walk, ambulate, take care of your needs, speak, be aware of things. And nursing homes who are highly regulated and scrutinized don't want the patients to lose weight, have bed sores, starve, be accused of not taking care of their patients well. And they're very good at spoon feeding and keeping people alive. And nobody ever asks, at what point would you want us to stop that? At what point would you want us to switch your care from prolonging your life to just making sure that you're comfortable? And for most people, the functional point that's tangible is when I can no longer give and receive love or affection. If we're put on this earth to love other people, and I lose that function and I can no longer permanently have the hope of doing that again, then I don't want my life prolonged. And that means I don't want CPR, breathing machine, feeding tube. If I can be kept comfortable, I don't want oxygen, I don't want my pneumonia treated. I would rather be kept comfortable while it ends this undesirable state of being. And this one is hard, even spoon feeding. And even this form doesn't mention spoon feeding consistently, but I include it in my conversations because I see many situations in which people are kept alive by spoon feeding, by compassionate people who are doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. But if the person were given a choice, they would say, please stop, make sure that I'm comfortable, and let this disease take its natural course. And so on this form, I suggest that what life support treatment means to me in a situation in which I have a permanent decision that's not going to be reversed. I don't want to be spoon-fed. Next slide. The next page on there, if you can. There.
That's not going.
Maybe it's frozen.
Something other than the download that would work?
There it goes. Okay. Back up one. Okay. There's several situations in which people, if I'm permanently close to death, permanent and severe brain damage, not expected to recover, or in a coma and not expected to wake up and recover, most people don't want life support in that situation, and that's pretty straightforward. But as I mentioned before, another condition in which I don't want to be kept alive, I suggest, my experience is that most people, that point at which they don't want to be kept alive is when they're no longer permanently unable to receive and give affection. Next slide. And then wishes 3 and 4 are, my wishes for how to be comfortable, which is basically symptom control, all those symptoms that we listed. And then my wishes for how I want to be people to treat me. Most of those are straightforward. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked a lot about end of life from a medical or symptom control. But I want to back up a little bit and just ask the question, what is a tangible measure of quality of life? Most of us, we don't want pain, we don't want to feel short of breath, we don't want to starve, we don't want to be thirsty. And the hospice and in most medical settings, we're very good at controlling those symptoms. But more important is if you've made clear advanced directives and you've made it clear the setting you want to be in, the point at which you want to transition from living as long as possible to just being comfortable, and then the point at which you don't want anything done to prolong your life. That gives us in the medical field clear directives, and we can usually control your symptoms, not only your symptoms, but also your setting. You can step around the back there. Okay. And we're, let's see. But the greatest determinant of quality of life is, I've found to be relationship time. I'll let you know, we put out announcements as to what time this started, and there were 2 announcements that got put out. One was at 5 o'clock and one was at 6 o'clock.
We saw them 6 o'clock.
Right.
Oh, so we've missed an
you can
hour,
have
so
a seat.
We're going to start over again
Yeah.
here in just a few minutes.
So the next determinant of quality of relationship is activities of enjoyment and then a sense of control. Next slide. So, as I said before, most people prefer to die prefer to die at home in that setting, surrounded by relationships. And those are the two things that I find are most important to people, is the quality of their relationships with the people that they love, being in familiar surroundings with a sense of control and free from suffering. Next slide. The last part of that document is basically what I want my loved ones to know. And there's some places for you to write there, but we want to live, learn, leave a legacy. Most of us, we want our life to tell a story. And advanced directive planning, I see my role is to try and get people to tell me how, what's important to them, how they want to die, and to be able to have the opportunity to write the last chapter of their life the way that they want it written. You can do that easier if you take the time to do advanced planning. Next slide. How to enact these. In this document, there's a place to sign it. There's a place to have it notarized, which is not required in Tennessee. I'm going to ask Barb to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. In the 5 wishes or the Tennessee state approved form that you can download, the requirements when you're naming a healthcare power of attorney or doing your advanced care plan is that it's signed by you, but then it's also signed either by 2 witnesses, and those witnesses have requirements. They can't be your power of attorney. They cannot be a relative or someone that is going to financially gain from your demise. Most facilities have a policy, now this is not law, but this is most facility policy that says our staff's not allowed to be such a witness. And that's kind of like, so if you come up with 2 witnesses, that's great, that meet those criteria, or you can have a notary for it to be a valid document. Again, it's important not only that you name an agent, but that you name a successor agent. So, because, you know, a lot of times, especially married couples, they tend to name each other. Well, that's probably the people that you're most likely to travel with. And if you were in a common common accident, car wreck kind of thing, you might wind up in the same ER and you're not exactly in a position to be making decisions for each other. So that's one of the reasons why we talk about an alternate, having an alternate or a backup plan. The other thing that we strongly recommend to our families when they come in and talk about these documents is that you have them lined up as primary and secondary, not as co's. Because it sort of muddies the water when you start talking about co's. Like, I want my daughter and my son to both be my power of attorney. Well, great. Have they ever agreed on anything? You know, so now you want them to agree on how you're going to be taken care of or how we're going to carry out your wishes. Don't recommend co's for lots of reasons. It kind of muddies the water, but a succession plan, and then having it appropriately executed, validly executed, so that it is a valid document, and then that it is shared with the right people, meaning the agents that you've named need to have a copy of your document so that if you can't tell them what you want, you at least can share with them what you've written down. The other person that needs to know is your primary care doctor. They need to have a copy of your document. When you go to the hospital, when you're admitted to a facility or something, they're going to want a copy of those documents. That's fine. I don't think you need to be like the little Easter bunny with your document and go around town and share it until the time's appropriate. But agents and physicians, certainly the most appropriate people to share it with. As you change, update, revise, or revoke your document, you need to go around and redistribute the new versions. And then where is your original going to be stored? Where are you going to put your originals? Our clients, they have a nice little binder, they got everything organized in one spot. It's kind of big, it's hard to get lost. So we say, you know, you need to make sure that your folks that need to know where you're putting that binder. So it's harder to lose than a piece of paper. But it doesn't necessarily need to go in the safe deposit box. You know, people think, oh, I put all my important papers in the safe deposit box. Well, guess what? Is your bank open on Friday night? Or Saturday or Sunday or Thanksgiving? You know, no, you can't get to them. So don't put them there. You're going to put them someplace at your house where they're safe. A lot of people in this part of the world have gun safes. So that's a safe place to put it. Not going to get lost, not going to burn, not going to fly away. You might have your own lockbox in your house, like a safe of some sort that's relatively heavy. Nobody wants to steal these things, right? So we're not worried about them being stolen. We're worried about them getting lost. Remember, 39% of the folks that have them can't find them when they need it. We're worried about them getting lost. I've only seen one burn up in 5 years, and I've only seen one float away in the flood of 2010, and that was the big, 100-year flood that Nashville had. So even floods, fires, thefts, losing them, that's the threat. So put it in a place where you're going to be able to find them again. That's all I got to say about that. Okay, what's next? So we've spent almost an hour now talking about how do you want your end of life, and maybe it's not even the end of life. Maybe it's that pre-end of life. How you're going to live getting up to that part of life. What's important to you? Is it important to you to be able to be in charge of your own risk? Are you a risk taker? Are you a person that would rather be living at home and at risk of falling than living in the assisted living and you had your wrists removed, but you're not independent anymore? Those things are your decisions to make as long as you have decision-making capacity. Anticipate the medical pathway. So being aware, being informed, activated patients, knowing what your disease is all about, assuming you have one. And the older you live, the more you tend to accumulate, at least diagnosis, if not active disease. Understanding that, knowing what the risks are, knowing what your treatment patterns are going to be. We all like thinking that our patients are taking an interest in their own care and they're not just backseat drivers letting us drive the bus. They want to know what's going on and they have to tell us what's important to them. And that's that old nurse in me coming out when I'm talking about us. I spent a long time being a long-term care nurse and loved every minute of it. But having conversations with your families. We need to re-normalize conversations about death. Death is a very common event. Every family has experienced one. It is something that is going to happen to all of us, and we know somebody who has died. It is a normal life occurrence. We need not be afraid to talk about it. Does it make it any more likely to happen? It's just going to happen. Make copies of your documents, share them appropriately. You may have other things that you want to talk about. If you don't know how to have that conversation, you don't have any idea how to get started, or your decision makers are particularly reluctant to hear, there is a program initiative called the Conversation Project that is all about telling you how to have these conversations. Fun ways to do it, from card games to dinner events that you can have to talk about it. There is also a great book. I'm not particularly endorsing anybody else's book, but it's a great book called Being Mortal, written by Dr. Atul Gawande. That's been on the national bestsellers list. It's very entertaining reading for being a book about death and dying. And I think our last slide means that we're done. You have an advance directive, not really because you necessarily have a diagnosis, a terminal diagnosis, but just because you have a family. And you don't want to burden them with making those decisions for you, those very difficult decisions.